Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Wednesday. It is Veterans Day 2020, and I guess you could say that I have a dog in the fight. Two of my favorite veterans have passed along now. My mother, Harriet Mills Larson, was a Lieutenant JG in the U.S. Navy, 1940 through 45. My dad was 1940 through 1960. Both of them have passed away. He came out of the Navy as a Chief Petty Officer, and I have family members and friends who have served in the military. I have not, but one of my firmest wishes as an American citizen and taxpayer is that America do right by those who go in and volunteer for military service in uniform. One of those Americans is Lieutenant Colonel Jay Carafano, an expert in national security and foreign policy challenges with the Heritage Foundation. Colonel, good to have you back. And is America doing right by our veterans?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. And, really cool to hear about your parents. Actually, both my parents were veterans, too. My mom was a WAC during the Korean War, and my dad fought in World War II in the Korean War. So thanks for your family's service. I think we are doing a lot of things right. I mean, people constantly hear these, numbers about suicides and other things. But on the other hand, compared to, say, like in the 1960s, when we treated veterans like a political football and we blamed them for the politics we didn't like, and we treated them incredibly badly, and we ignored their needs and their issues. I think this generation of Americans has recognized that we shouldn't play politics with our veterans. There's a lot of really great organizations out there in the private sector. And I think what we've really learned is, veterans are not a class of disability. They aren't an interest group. They aren't a bunch of dependents. They're us. And they volunteer to serve. And what that means is they're service valued, but often when they go back into public life, they're some of the best citizens in our communities. No veteran, and if a veteran gets in trouble, whether it's mental or physical health issue or financial or anything else, they don't want a handout. They just want a handout. And there are so many stories I could give you of veterans who got help, oftentimes from volunteer groups in the private sector, who now are some of the greatest givers in their communities.
Colonel, one of my biggest fears about this is that we are seeing a smaller and smaller number of people who both serve in the military. The number who serve is around 2 million. If you total up a Guard, Reserve, active duty, and everybody else, it's about 2 million, which, if you do the math, is well under 2/3 of 1% of the population. If you take all the veterans, those who have served and those who are currently serving in uniform, it's really a tiny percentage of all Americans. And it was once the case in America that almost no family lacked a connection, a direct connection to somebody who was serving. And today, it's becoming increasingly rare. You have whole groups of people, families, where they may not have a single service member in their family. And I worry that given that situation, people are going to care less and less about the plight of American veterans because they lack that direct connection that we would have had during World War I, World War II, Korea, and even Vietnam. Today, thankfully, because of technology and other things, and I think because we've had a president for the last 4 years who gets us out of wars instead of into wars, we're going to see fewer and fewer both veterans and active duty members going into the future. How do we make sure and counteract that effect so that people still understand there's an obligation there for the rest of us to make sure that we meet the needs of those veterans? And again, a hand up, like you said, not a handout. They've earned every dime of it.
Yeah. Well, so there's a great good news, bad news story. I mean, the good news is we don't need mass army, which is great. And, we've had a president who the last 4 years is the first president in recent memory who actually didn't start a war. So thank God we have enough young men and women who volunteer to fill the ranks. I think that says a lot about them. I think the bad news is it's not so much whether you serve or not, but I think the problem that I look at is what's called propensity to serve and ability to serve. Over 70% of military-age youth are not even eligible to be in the military. That's because of the arrest or education issue or a health issue or something. And parents don't encourage their children to volunteer in military service anymore. I think that's something we can address. A colleague of mine, Justin Anderson, and I wrote an article in the Washington Times about this. There's so much that we can do in our communities to encourage our children to be capable and have the propensity to serve. Look, if you graduate from high school and you keep your nose clean, stay out of jail, you live a healthy life, you get married, you get a job. I mean, you'll be a great person to serve in the military, but even if you don't serve in the military, you'll be a great citizen and contributor to your community. And so I think that's what we really need to focus on.
Well, and Colonel, I think we've provided a lot of the right incentives. For example, I hear people say, well, gosh, I can't afford to go to college, or my kid can't afford to go to college. And I say, sign up for the National Guard, sign up for military service. And as you say, if you incentivize them and say, hey, you ought to go do this, do it for a hitch. And if you decide to come out or make it a career, either way, there are some tremendous benefits. One of my first employers in radio was a guy, his last name was Larson, but he spelled it differently, so he's no relation. But I remember that he came out of the Air Force in the 50s and went to college on the GI Bill. And then he stayed in the Air Force Reserve. And by the time I worked for him, I think he was a brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve. And it served him well, but it also served the community well. And I think there are a lot of schools, public schools, that don't welcome the military, even though if we wanted something that would sort of level the playing field and say, how do we get to those kids who are poor or whose families don't have the resources to send them to school? Encourage them to go into the military, do your service for your country in uniform, even though we appear to be headed toward ongoing peacetime. And when you come out, you can go to college, you can buy a house. I just heard today they've uncapped the amount of house you can buy under the GI Bill. There used to be a cap on it. Now they say you can buy whatever you can afford. And all of those are absolutely astounding benefits from, say, 4 years or 6 years in the U.S. military.
Yeah, if we were doing this right as a country, 70% of our kids would be qualified for military service.
Yep.
And they would be fighting for the opportunity to have the privilege of serving their country if we were doing this right. And that's what we really got to focus on. We are not treating our kids well by not preparing them to be successful citizens in anything we choose. The military doesn't make you a citizen. I mean, you're a citizen. They volunteer to go. It may make them smarter, teach them skills, give them better habits, make them better, discipline and be successful after. But it doesn't put the brand of "I love my country" on their heart. That's put because they volunteer to serve, and that's because of their parents, their pastor, their teachers, their coaches, their mentors, the people that said, "Be healthy. Lead a good life, want to do better, grow as a person, grow as a member of your community." And, that's why when we help veterans who have physical and mental issues, whatever they are, they wind up being part of the greatest givers back in their community. And look, these kids, they are our pastors, our teachers, our doctors, our nurses, the people fixing our cars, they are all in these communities, and they give back so much to this country. So we should honor them. We should better. And if you say, how do I get more of them? We should do a better job of raising our kids.
Yeah, we should. And I agree with you. The very idea that 70% of the kids, by the time they get to where they could volunteer for the military in their late teens or early 20s, are incapable of doing so, that isn't going to serve them well in life, whether they end up going into a military career or military service at all. If your kid is already in trouble health-wise or legally or some other way, by the time they get to 20 or 21, that's a pretty disturbing statistic. Colonel, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your service in uniform, and we always appreciate you coming on to talk about the national security issues you usually talk about. I appreciate the time.
God bless you. Thanks. Happy Veterans Day.
Thanks, sir. Happy Veterans Day to you as well. That's Lieutenant Colonel James Carafano. We talked to him from the Heritage Foundation. There's something coming up, and I'm going to get to your phone calls in this next segment. So if you want to jump in, it's 866-439-5277. There are potentially 2 pending runoffs for the U.S. Senate in the state of Georgia. It may happen January 5th. It may be that the final vote count will actually determine one of those without the need of that January 5th runoff. But there's a very important issue, and we're going to see the first test of it. It's the right to work. That is, the ability, as people in Georgia have right now, to be able to go to work somewhere and not join a union if they choose not to. It's one of the major issues in the runoff between John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in the state of Georgia. Georgia has the right to work, but it might just lose it under the next administration. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show.